Scott Schara, who we've had on Blood Money before. In fact, we were one of the first outlets to expose what had happened to Scott's daughter, Grace. And today we are very happy to announce that Scott's case against the hospital that killed his daughter is going forward. On this Blood Money episode, we discuss this case, the trials, the pitfalls, and the challenges that lay ahead in exposing the mass murder of the hospital killing fields. This is Blood Money episode 183. Thank you for joining us. All right, welcome to the latest Blood Money episode. Today we have a very special guest, Scott Schara. Did I say your last name right?
Pretty close, Schara.
Schara. It's amazing to have you back on here. We had you on a prior Blood Money podcast speaking about your daughter, Grace, and really the medical murders that have been happening within hospitals. It's a controversial topic, but we've had many guests, including nurses, doctors, that have spoken about how, frankly, there's a financial amount placed upon human individuals, and frankly, something like medical murder is a real thing. And so, Scott, do you mind first bringing the viewer up to speed in terms of what your family has gone through and where you are today with the incredible breakthroughs that have been happening over the last few weeks?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Medical murder, just to go off on a little bit of a rabbit trail with that term has become acceptable, and it's our case highlights that, because what we have as a society accepted is that medical malpractice is an accident, and there certainly is some accidents that are medically related, but as I've dug into it, I have found that the reality is hastening death is what's happening, and hastening death is murder. And we as a society have accepted that medical murder is an acceptable crime. And our case lays out that it's not acceptable anymore. So to frame what's going on and how we got into this, before Grace's murder, so my daughter Grace was 19. Her last day on earth was October 13th of 2021. And Grace had Down syndrome. She was a special gift from God. And I was a businessman with a healthy distrust for the government, but I was not awake to anything. I would not have known about medical murder. I thought a hospital was a safe zone, and I have woken up, I don't know to what degree. I mean, a large degree, as you're going to learn as we talk through some of these things, but that's where I started from. So Grace's last day on earth was, as I said, October 13th of 21. That was at the high point of the COVID deaths. As I've learned, the COVID deaths in hospitals were ratcheted up in the United States specifically, because we're according to God's book of Revelation, the United States is going to deceive all nations with its pharmakia. And boy, did we do that. We, in the COVID era, which was 39 months long, we had 1.2 million hospital murders. And so that number should shock you, but it will really shock you when you realize that we were number one in the entire world. Number two was India with 531,000 deaths, and their population is 4 times that of the United States. Mm-hmm. So now as we drill it down to Grace's death, and I think God did it this way, Vem, because Grace never was on any of the emergency use authorization tricks, the remdesivir or ventilator. So what they did to Grace was they euthanized her. And that's why I've become outspoken, because as I became a researcher, I realized, oh my gosh, there's a euthanasia agenda. And it was started in the early 1900s with the United States starting to really develop the current version of eugenics. And, so that's how far back the current killing goes. Anyway, so Grace, what happened with Grace, we took her into the hospital on October 6th. She had low oxygen saturation, and we were led to believe that 88%, which is what she was reading, was low and she should be admitted to the hospital. Well, that really is not true. As I've learned now, if you have a cold or flu, your oxygen saturation is going to drop into the mid to high 80s, and that's normal. It doesn't require a hospital visit. So that's part of the programming. I had to deprogram myself, of course, because that programming led me to the hospital. Then you believe you can trust the white coat. And ultimately, 7 days later, Grace was dead. Grace just had a bad cold. There's no reason I would take her to the hospital at all. Well, ultimately, if they would have just did what they told us, which was they said they're going to put her on oxygen and a steroid and get her home in 3-4 days, Grace would be alive today. But they didn't do that. In fact, what they did, and so there's multiple levels here that, in hindsight, I see now, and that's why I've become outspoken. One is I should have never taken Grace to the hospital. But number two, I didn't understand what advocacy meant. So advocacy means you hold physicians to account to your medical directives and insist that they provide informed consent. So, I challenged lots of different things in the hospital, but I didn't realize where my rights really stood, but I do now. And so because I was challenging things, they ultimately took me out by an armed guard on October 10th. And then they started ratcheting up meds on Grace. They sedated Grace while we didn't have an advocate in the room. We had to hire an attorney to get my daughter Jessica in as a replacement advocate. And when you turn the page to Grace's last day, the doctor got on the phone with my wife Cindy and I that morning and told us how great of a day Grace had the day before, which we knew in spite of her being sedated for 4 days already, Vem. So we knew she'd had a great day because Jessica told us that. But he was lying to us on the phone. He said we should get Grace out of the bed today, get her in a chair, get her feeding tube in so that we can get her out of the hospital in the next 3-4 days. Well, before he even got us on the phone, they'd already strapped Grace down to the bed after insisting my daughter Jessica leave for an hour to go take a shower. And
sorry to interrupt you. That sounds like sociopathic, like worse than Charles Manson type, like psycho stuff that you just said. And you're telling me this individual's a doctor and he's like lying to you, knowing that they're killing your daughter, but giving you this BS story.
Well, and I'm going to connect some dots because, I've become a full-time researcher, Vem, and my first research was into Grace's case. So, I'm going to drill this down now that you asked that question. So the call came in about 10 o'clock that morning, and he's telling us how great of a day Grace had. But the first purpose of his call was to ask for our pre-authorization to put Grace on a ventilator just in case. And just in case meant essentially what he told us was that, these type of things tend to happen in the middle of the night. So we just want your pre-authorization just in case we need to do that. Well, we had already researched ventilators, knew we're not going to approve a ventilator. And this was indeed the 5th request for that pre-authorization. And so I suspect he knew, based on the sequence of events that I'm going to explain next, I suspect he knew that we would not approve a ventilator. And the sequence of events that happened next is, so now while we were still on the phone with him, he increased the dose of the sedation med that they had started on Grace 4.5 days earlier to the maximum allowable dose. Remember, while we're on the phone, he's telling us we got to get her out of bed. She's doing well, but then he increases the dose to the maximum allowable dose. This is after we said to him, we're not going to put Grace on a ventilator. And unbelievably, simultaneous with hanging up the phone with us, he put an illegal do not resuscitate order on Grace. So my suspicion is they thought the Precedex would take Grace out. That's the sedation med.
You're basically, sorry, you're talking about a doctor that it's mind blowing to me, man. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but like he's like premeditating the murder of your daughter and at the same time giving you this like Oscar worthy performance over the phone.
Well, that's certainly how I see it now. And I see it that way because of the research. It took me about 6 months after Grace's death to realize she was murdered. And that, my standard is extremely high because I am accountable to God. The court system that we're in is an antichrist system. So I don't want people to get some fantasy that this court's going to pursue justice here. And, of course, we're hoping that they do. God opened up this door, but I don't know where the case is going to go. I mean, we had a major victory last Monday, which we're going to talk about, but, we'll see. I mean, time's going to tell what happens. But anyway, after I concluded she was murdered, then I really started digging in what's going on. And the reason I concluded she was murdered is because of what happened next. I didn't know that the doctor put a DNR order on her at that time. Now that we have the legal case and I have the phone records, I've pieced it all together, and you can see how diabolical this timeline is. So what they did next, so the Precedex did not kill Grace, that max dose. And what's interesting is if you look at her death certificate, this is a little bit of a rabbit trail, but you see that they actually told the truth relative to the first cause of death, because it says acute respiratory failure with hypoxemia, which is a direct cause and effect for using Precedex for more than 24 hours. It says it right in the package insert for the drug. So because that didn't kill her, and now they have the DNR in place, they combined Precedex with lorazepam and morphine. And they did that in a 29-minute window, which that would kill anybody. That's what they give hospice patients to euthanize them in their last hour of life. And after they gave Grace the morphine, she was dead an hour and 15 minutes later. When it came time to revive Grace, that's when we realized they had a DNR, because we're screaming. Jessica was in the room. She called us on FaceTime saying, "Dad, Grace's numbers are tanking." And so I said, get the nurses in the room. She said, "I've been trying, they refuse." So we start screaming to save our daughter, and they holler back from outside the room, "She's DNR." So they use the do not resuscitate order as the excuse to not give Grace the reversal drug, which the morphine package insert says they're required to do. They're supposed to monitor the patient and keep the reversal drug bedside. First of all, they're not ever supposed to combine those meds. But if they do, they're supposed to do those things. So that sequence got me to realize she was murdered. Well, then as I dug in further, I found the fact that, this plan B that they had. So plan A is they're going to approve a ventilator. If they approve a ventilator, Grace would not have died on October 13th. Why? Because the maximum payout for a ventilator is 22 days. The hospital receives about $300,000 if they can keep the patient on the ventilator for 22 days. So I realized, okay, so what's the plan B? What's motivating the plan B? Well, what motivated the plan B is the hospital's bed capacity on October 13th of 2021 was 0. They had no beds available. So Grace, in fact, was more dead than alive, because they had people waiting in the ER for a bed to free up. So, that's my case. I'm sticking with it. I mean, I believe it all the way. That isn't what the civil case is about specifically, because it's not a murder case. Eventually we're hopeful that the district attorney's office will pick up on the case and we'll have a criminal conviction as well. But I mean, time will tell.
I mean, we just had an episode recently about the family law industry. It was actually called Family Law Terrorism, because it's very clear that the family law, judiciary, all that stuff, like you said, is an antichrist system. It's an evil system. It's there to destroy families. It sounds like the hospital's medical system is also now, from what you are saying, especially if this is actually happening, a lot. And from the interviews we've done, we've heard about the COVID, hospital death camps, clearly thousands of people that have fallen victim to this. I mean, is it pretty much evil forces have taken over our medical industrial complex, would you say?
I would say that's 100% certainty. And that's the only way you can really understand what's happening, if you understand that this is a spiritual battle. This is a battle for souls. And the medical industry has really replaced God. And that's how we got duped into this. The whole vaccine agenda, that's been around way longer than what people think. But I mean, they have used propaganda to show that vaccines have reduced certain viruses and things. It's all lies. No vaccine's ever been tested. It's safe water has been what's reduced disease, not vaccines. But it's all been under the guise that if God doesn't exist, well, then man has to do something to protect man. So they come up with all these schemes and have programmed not only the masses to believe in the medical industrial complex, but they program the medical industrial complex to believe in this foolishness too. And I'll give you a couple of stories in that regard, Vem. This is about 6 years ago now, I learned I had heart disease. I don't know when I developed it, but I learned I had heart disease. And I went into the doctors, it was an emergency. I got to do all these tests and blah, blah, blah. Well, ultimately they say, well, you need to be on a statin. And I thought, well, I'm not on any drugs. I'm anti-drug. So I started researching. I had about 300 hours of research in and concluded, yeah, I'm not going on a statin. The nurse in the doctor's office, she was one of the good ones, because she pulled me aside and said, Scott, I want to tell you something that you're not going to want to hear. I said, well, what is it? She said, you have to go on the statin. I said, what do you mean I have to? And it's because, and she didn't literally mean have to, because you still had a choice then. But she said, our Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement rates are based on what percentage of our patient population we get to follow the protocols that are scripted by the insurance companies. So I'm not on Medicare or Medicaid. So I said, well, I'm not on any of those. She said, it doesn't matter. The protocols are written across the board, and our Medicaid and Medicare reimbursement rates are determined based on the overall patient population that subscribes to these protocols. So it's like ding, ding, ding. And so she said, if we have enough people like you who reject the protocols, we have to fire you, because we need to get our reimbursement rates up in order to stay profitable. So, I mean, that's the reality.
It's always the financial incentive. I mean, with the COVID vaccines too, which it's interesting because we're going to expose a story very soon about an individual that pulled their medical records, found out that she had been vaccinated 3 times, went to her doctor, got her blood tested, got everything tested, confirmed that indeed she hadn't been vaccinated, and then realized that this was probably the hospital running a scam, claiming that she had been vaccinated and collecting illegal funds, essentially an insurance scam, which I'm sure if we found one, there's potentially thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands out there. So basically, it's all about the money. It's all about these financial incentives that are driving individuals to do evil things. And you're in a system that if you don't do those evil things, then you pretty much don't have a job, more or less. I mean, is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, that's a very accurate statement. And, God says the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. And I'm going to share a couple more now. I mean, this is great, Vem. I really like this back and forth. So, there's some naivety with the medical profession. And that naivety is not an excuse, by the way, but I'll give you an example. And there's some people who know. So I'm going to give you examples on both extremes. We, as God would have it, sat in the bleachers at a demolition derby over Labor Day weekend, and Grace's original pediatrician, when she was first born, happened to sit behind Cindy and I in the stand. So we started chatting with him, and he didn't know that Grace died, even though we have a local billboard campaign calling out the hospital. So you would think that as a physician, somebody locally calling out a hospital, you would check it out, right? But He didn't even check it out. So he just said, well, when did Grace die? So we said, well, in October of 21. And he said, well, wasn't there some antiviral available then? Something like Remdesivir something? It's like, oh my gosh. I said to him, how awake are you relative to what happened with COVID? And he said, well, I get my information from 3 nurses at one of the local hospitals. And I thought, oh man, this is the blind leading the blind. They're clueless as the fact that they're killing people. Well, then now take it to somebody who is awake. I started speaking out. This is about 22 months ago now, and a reporter for a newspaper in Wisconsin did an article on Grace's story, and her neighbor, who is a nurse, called her and said, that man is lying. And specifically, she said, I was lying about the illegal DNR order that was put on Grace's chart. Well, then about 6 months ago, that same lady called the reporter and said, he's not lying. And so she told her the story as to why. And I said, well, can you broker a call with me and this nurse? So she did. And I got the nurse on the phone. And so she told me what happened. She said, I'm the nurse in the hospital that my dad is staying in, and I have power of attorney. And the doctor put an illegal do not resuscitate order on my dad. And so I said to her, this is, now that you realize I'm not lying, will you come on programs with me and share this? I said, people's lives are at stake. They got to know that this is happening. And she said, I'm 66 years old. I'm a year away from retirement. And I just can't do that. I can't jeopardize my retirement. So this is the type of thing that's going on, Vem. I mean, this is, it is. So from on one end, you have doctors who are programmed so strongly, they can't see anything outside of this little that they're in. And then you have other ones that they're afraid that if they speak out, they're going to get terminated, lose their license or whatever.
I mean, is that it? Or, I mean, are these, the individual that you just described, I mean, that just sounds like a murderer.
Well, they don't really, I mean, they'll never call it that, but they are.
That's what it is. He knows that child's going to die from his like decisions right there. So, I mean, how could it not be? Like, what is it? Please, like, if you could explain to me, what is the logic that's running through his head that is justifying those things that he's done?
Yeah, and that starts drilling down to our case, because this is quite interesting. When I've learned, I have kind of a minor in a minor legal degree right now. If we get a lot of money in this case, so I guess you get a legal degree when you spend the money on the attorneys. But one of the things that I learned is that the doctors have basically an umbrella, and it's called medical malpractice legislation. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So in Wisconsin, it happens to be Chapter 655. So that lays out that basically any claim for a wrongful death against a physician is a medical malpractice claim. And furthermore, the statute requires the physician to get medical malpractice insurance. So what goes through the mind of a physician, I suppose, is that, well, I'm just following orders and it really doesn't matter because I have no consequences. When you take away God's law of choice and consequences, this is the type of thing that happens. Well, then drill it down to another state statute. And I'm bringing these up from Wisconsin simply because I have them memorized, but these same statutes are going to be in every single state because they set this up well in advance of COVID. COVID just exposed it. So there's an informed consent statute in Wisconsin. So it happens to be 448.30. All right, so what does that statute say? And first, Vem, if you just think about informed consent, if you and I were physicians, do we need an informed consent statute? I mean, God already tells you what informed consent looks like. Treat your neighbor as yourself. So, I mean, if you had a patient, you would want them to know what's going on, right? Tell them everything that's going on so they can assess whether they want to do it or not. That's just how you treat your fellow human being. That's God's law. But they codify informed consent in a statute. All right, so then it lays it out. It actually, the statute isn't bad the way it lays it out, but it's not necessary. The state constitution already has our natural right to life. You don't need a statute laying out informed consent, but they do. All right, so the reason they do it is because if you look at 448.40, you'll see that there's a big gap because a statute should have enforcement. What happens if the doctor violates informed consent? Well, interestingly, and I found out this the hard way because I filed a complaint against the doctor, and then the regulatory agency that regulates the doctor's license send me, this is the first day I started waking up, they send me a letter back that said they did an investigation. The doctor didn't do anything wrong. I think, how can they do nothing wrong? I showed you the whole case, and I told them the same thing I just got done telling you, but via paper. So how could you say he did nothing wrong? Well, guess what? The medical examining board that is required by state statute is made up of 10 physicians and 3 lay people. So this would be like a police officer giving his fellow police officer a speeding ticket. It's not going to happen, right?
Yeah. And one thing I want to mention here, this is really for the viewers, because again, we just did an episode about really the judiciary, the family law industrial complex, and it's the exact same thing there. They have these bar boards. It's basically you're going to criminals and asking them to handcuff themselves because they're all in cahoots with each other, right? So exactly. Judges do horrible things in these family law courts, literally separate fathers from their children, mothers from their children for no reason, because the only reason you're supposed to do that is if there's danger to the children. And in most cases, there isn't, right? And so you have all these judges that do these horrible things. You submit these bar complaints, and they do absolutely nothing because they're all bar agents. They're all part of this unlawful monopoly, and you're essentially going to unlawful monopoly, saying, "Hey, like your brother or sister in this unlawful monopoly, this little secret society you've created, is a criminal. Please call them out." And they're never going to do that. And the exact same thing is with medical industrial complex. So it's clear that all of our institutions have been wholly corrupted, because if your judiciary and your medical industrial complex is broken, I mean, what do you really have in this country?
Well, I of course agree 100%, and that's why we're unbelievably thankful that this case has proceeded. So let me just frame the case, Vem, because I know that was what motivated you to have me on, and so people can understand the significance of where things are at. We really have a trailblazing case. I say that under the idea that, remember, we're using a satanic system to expose evil. So we're really using the system against itself. And you're going to see how we did that when I explain what happened on October 30th. But first, we filed our lawsuit on April 11th. And the process of filing a lawsuit, you file a complaint, and then the defendants all have to respond within X number of days. So they did. We filed not only against Ascension Hospital System, which is the largest Catholic hospital system in the United States. They're the second largest nonprofit hospital system. They're huge. They have $30 billion in cash. So we filed against them. And we filed against the 5 doctors and 2 nurses who were directly involved with Grace's death. All right. So now all the defendants had to respond. They did. The judge, one of the defendants, filed a motion to dismiss. The judge heard that motion on July 14th, and he really did the unthinkable on July 14th. Not only did he not accept their motion to dismiss, but he set the 3-week jury trial. So we, at that point, had the first 3-week jury trial, the first jury trial period in the entire country, and it starts November 4th of 2024. Which is the day before the presidential election. So we have that in the book. Well, then he at that first hearing, he told our legal team that because informed consent is really now medical malpractice, even though lack of informed consent is a battery, he wanted our legal team to separate out the battery claim. So that's what we did. And so we separated out the battery claim with the amended filing on July 28th. And that, of course, set, that really lit the fireworks, because then we had two more motions to dismiss, and they all joined in on it. And those motions to dismiss were heard on October 30th. And those were specifically to stop our battery claim, because battery means intent. That means we get to expose the intentional actions of these characters who killed my daughter. And this is trailblazing because there has not been a battery case heard in a medical murder case in at least 50 years. That's how big this is. And what the team did in our brief, so what happens when there's a motion to dismiss, we get a chance to write what's called a brief in opposition. And the judge had both of those documents before the hearing on October 30th. And I'm going to read from our brief. And I posted our brief on Grace's website, Vem. And I did it because this will help any attorney and any individual that is going up against the medical industrial complex, because it lays out the fact that there's a difference between lack of informed consent as a battery and a common law battery. And that's important, because if you were talking about the lady with the supposed vaccine, she's exposing the money behind it because they were lying. But, there's all kinds of people who have injuries and death because of vaccines. And you might remember Dr. Moon was in front of Ron Johnson's committee, and she pulled out the package insert for the bioweapon, and it was blank. Okay, so the package insert becomes informed consent. All right, so now if they claim that informed consent isn't a battery, well, we can have a common law battery because of what our team did to pierce the medical malpractice veil. So I want to read some things out of that motion, and then people can find it on the website. I have it right on the front page, where I have a couple of documents for the legal case at ouramazinggrace.net. So I've got the document here in front of me. I'm gonna just pull out two specific paragraphs. So the first one, Vem, what they did was they differentiated between what does lack of informed consent look like versus what does a common law battery look like. So, quote, imagine a physician who fails to fully inform a patient about the risks of a leg amputation, but the patient does agree to have his leg amputated. This violates the duty to obtain informed consent under state statute. Now imagine a physician who amputates a patient's leg without obtaining consent or even telling the patient or the patient's family what he is doing. And in this case, removing the patient's power of attorney and parent from the hospital first. That's me. That is a battery. So you see what they're doing is they're differentiating the idea. You think about going into a hospital so people get what's going on. Most people are familiar. You go into a hospital, you trust the white coat, and they start doing things, right? And then sometimes after the fact, they tell you what they did, but most of the time you kind of just go along with it. You trust them. So that is violating. If they told you what's going on beforehand, but didn't tell you the whole truth, would be violating their responsibility to give informed consent, which is the whole truth relative to a procedure or a drug. But if they tell you nothing, it's a battery. And so that's what our team is differentiating. So most of these things that are happening in the hospital are batteries, which is a big deal because they're intentionally not telling the patient. Why? We know you've already exposed. A lot of it's because of the money. Some of it's because of the aloofness. Some of it's because of the training. Mainly, I think it's because they all know they don't have any consequence to their choices. All right. So that's the first one I wanted to read. Then they frame this case very nicely. So this is later on in the document. On the website, I have these paragraphs highlighted in the document so people can find them and read them for themselves and copy and paste them. Please do. I paid a lot of money to get this done, and I want people to use it. I'm not doing this for my health. I'm doing this because of the responsibility to save lives. All right, so quote, defendants want this court to rule that a patient with Down syndrome can be intentionally restrained, intentionally deprived of advocacy, and intentionally administered deadly sedatives, all without consent. And these actions are simple medical negligence. So assuming battery under medical malpractice in such a way would make hospitals walled gardens where any intentional misconduct would be treated as simple negligence. Indeed, defendants envision a world where there is no common law claim for the failure of a healthcare provider to obtain consent that falls outside of medical malpractice. In this world, an unethical or financially motivated physician may administer deadly drugs without consent for malign purposes, including making room for new patients. The physician's liability would be limited under the medical malpractice statute, and even that liability would be subject to insurance coverage. So you see, we went on the offensive here, Vem, that this is not right. And we laid it out in factual terms that the common person can read this and say, yes, this is what killed my dad. This is what killed my mom. This is what killed my brother. And now we've opened up the door because not only do we pierce the veil, so it's real important to pierce that veil because now the medical providers, we're trying to stop this behavior. They realize their insurance isn't going to cover their rear ends anymore. So that's number one. But number two is the statute of limitations for a battery generally doubles versus wrongful death is anywhere from 1 to 3 years typically. So now we have an extended statute of limitations for a lot of these cases. So that's fantastic. And then the other thing that it opens up is punitive damages. Because we have a common law battery claim now, we can get awarded punitive damages. So we've already said we're not taking the money, so it isn't about us. But the reason that's important is because attorneys are not taking on wrongful death cases, Vem, and there's no money in them. The state statutory limit of a medical malpractice claim is $750,000, and the odds of winning a medical malpractice claim because of the number of experts the defense brings in to lie to the jury is only 1 in 10. Statistically, it's only 1 in 10. So attorneys are not taking on these cases because there's not enough money to even cover their costs. But now, because there's a punitive damage opportunity, because we opened up this door for battery, attorneys would be willing to take on the cases on a percentage. So then the common person can afford to do it because it's not out of their pocket.
Wow. So, I mean, we should be realistic about like the pitfalls, because one of the things that we often see is that, with cases that go forward, then they start using certain procedural things to, balance out the case. There's a lot of tricks they can do within the process to harm the case. Now, in terms of the judge that decided the date, is that the same judge that's going to see the case forward?
It is.
I mean, that's a positive thing, because by virtue of the fact that he even accepted the case, that's something that it could be a positive thing.
Well, I think it is. I mean, it seems at least so I'll share. This is important because judges make a lot of decisions that are wrong because they're unwilling to follow the law. And this is where I said we use their own laws against them. And when I say them, it's not the defense here. It's really the Antichrist system. And what they did in the beginning of the brief, they set the stage as far as what the judge is responsible to follow relative to the law. So I'm quoting again, in analyzing the motions, the court should accept all allegations in the plaintiff's amended complaint as true. The complaint is only insufficient if it appears to be a certainty that no relief can be granted under any set of facts which plaintiff can prove. So the judge with that's a legal principle. And so we pled the case. We've got 100 details relative to Grace's death in our complaint, also known as pleadings. You read those, and so the judge has to accept everything that we wrote as fact, and then the burden of proof is on us. But he's got to accept that if he's going to follow the rule of law. So this judge isn't necessarily in our favor. That's not the way I'm looking at it. It just, he was willing to follow the rule of law, which is a rarity in and of itself. So we've got a lot of work to do. The team is extremely confident because, we've already spent lots of hours just getting to this point to make sure that we have a real strong case. But we got a judge that's willing to follow the rule of law. That's really that's why it's important to have the same judge, because most of them they're not going to be willing to do that for lots of different reasons.
Yeah. It's recently the number of people that have told me that their loved one passed away and they think it's the COVID vaccine, right? I've heard this story over and over again. And especially lately, like people tell me, oh, friends are, passing away, a lot. It's unusual. And a lot of people seem to be waking up, realizing that something nefarious happened. And the reason I mentioned that is because a lot of those people aren't necessarily taking action. They're not necessarily going after the individuals that are responsible for this travesty. But you are. I mean, you've stuck with it. And so my question to you is, what is your driving force? It seems like, even with this case, win or lose, it seems like you're not stopping. There's a few people, by the way, that we've met through the Blood Money podcast that have similar characteristics, like the Brunson brothers, Lloyd Brunson. Whatever happens with his case, he will not stop. Well, what is your driving force?
Well, my driving force is God. When we lost Grace, my wife and I, after the first week, we just thought, well, what are we going to do? And we thought our life was going to be having a nonprofit. We started a nonprofit organization thinking we're going to help people with disabilities. Well, then as God orchestrated the sequence of events, we realized I think he's calling us to jump in. And so when we decided to do it, we just told him, whatever doors you open, we're going to walk through. And so how do you say no to that? Right. So that's what's going on. I mean, you notice I'm sipping coffee so between God and coffee, those are my two things that are keeping me going.
Wow.
I have never drank so much coffee in my life, but I have never worked. So I've started 3 businesses from scratch, Vem. And so when you start, that's a lot of work. And this is, God made me for this time. So in the book of Esther, everybody quotes that verse, that how do you know you weren't made for a time such as this? And, now that I see what my training was, my business training, and, even the story I told you about the heart disease, and, there's so many things. It's like, oh my gosh, he made me for this time. And I have an organizational skill, a research skill, all things that I knew I had, but I mean, I really haven't been using them for years. And, praise God, he gave me those skills, and, I'm on fire to help people. You don't want anybody to lose their life from, my best buddy is not here anymore, Vem. All right.
Mhm.
So why isn't she here? It's because I was not awake. If I would have been awake, Grace would be alive. We're going into the Wisconsin deer hunting season. She was my best buddy deer hunting with me. I
Mhm.
miss that. I don't want anybody to go through that. Even the people who killed Grace. The best thing that could happen, Vem. So we're in this to stop the behavior. That's why that's why I told we don't want any money from the lawsuit. We're just after stopping the behavior. God picked us to do this. So you can't take any money from that. But, the behavior could be stopped way faster than our lawsuit. And it would be stopped if the doctors and nurses who did this to Grace repented and came forward. And let's get this out and tell the world, because they're going to be way more credible than me. They're insiders. They know what happened. So let's just get out and tell the world, repent. And that would be fantastic. God did something to me that people ask, well, how can you even do this without, the revenge factor? And it's because God did it. I went into a different hospital 3 days after Grace was murdered, and I just about died on October 16th. And while I was in that hospital, by the way, turned me around. They didn't do what they did to Grace. And so that was another piece so I could see this story objectively. But what he did there was he gave me a spirit of forgiveness, because you can't do that on your own. You can't forgive the doctor and nurse who murdered your daughter. If we could do that as humans, it wouldn't be, it's not in our human capacity, but that's why we have a gospel. And, God worked that into my heart so that I could have the spirit of forgiveness towards those people. So that's the long version, I guess, as to why I'm in this.
Amazing, amazing, Scott. Scott, this has been awesome, and you're certainly made for times like this. I think a lot of us are. We find ourselves, out here fighting kind of this overall tyranny that's happening, and hopefully, I don't know. We'll see. 24 is going to be an interesting year. That's for
Oh my
sure.
gosh. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I see this as urgent.
Hmm.
That's, we've been approached to write a book, to do a movie, and I've rejected all those things because, we it's urgent. I
Hmm.
mean, we're really on the cusp of of losing here. And nobody knows God's timeline other than the Father, but I happen to think we're in the days of Noah, and so I see the urgency. I mean, I see people, they're completely clueless
Yeah.
as to what's going on. um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
anyway, that's why I get on as many programs as I can, because I never know if one person gets woken up today, then it was worth it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that's what people that are following the path of God have to do in these insane times. I mean, you know what you say, and it's funny because I was trying to describe what we do here because all we're doing is media. I mean, you guys are the real heroes, really. I mean, I have such great admiration for individuals like you because for every Scott, there's thousands that have gone through the same like terror and they don't do anything, they don't fight it out. And I just wish there was more of you out there. But thinking about how we approach things, we look at it as we're like an arc, like we're transitioning to something. Are we transitioning into full-on communism and tyranny, or are we actually is this 1776? Are we fighting for our God-given rights that stem that we're represented by the Constitution? So we are certainly a transitional device to whatever it is we're going through, because some people I don't think are going to be okay with the CBDC, digital currency system, and digital slavery. And once they do that, I mean, people like you are silenced. I mean, that's done. I mean, at that point, the hospital kills your daughter, and then now you can't even talk about it because they could turn off your currency.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm not planning on submitting to that piece of what's coming. And I see what's coming in through a quite a different lens because of what God has laid on my heart. So
Mhm.
when I first started sharing, it was probably after, I shouldn't say first, it was probably, I may have had 6 months into sharing Grace's story. And what I came to grips with is the idea that in Revelation 13, there's two systems. There's the Antichrist system and the false prophet system. And those two systems are both run by Satan. Satan has an evil side, which is the Antichrist system, and a less evil side, which is the false prophet system. And so this race to expose evil that we see in the media, I'm specifically talking about the alternative media. It seems like there is an absolute race. Everybody's got one better than the guy last week. And it just keeps happening. The mRNA technology goes through breast milk, and it just keeps going. And we gotta get off of that, because that plays into Satan's hand. And the reason it plays into Satan's hand is because he has another major card to play, which is designed to dupe all of humanity, and that's the false prophet card. And he's already shown he did this with 9/11. In 9/11, we've got this evil, and then what do? I mean, we submitted to this Patriot Act that was designed to kill us in about 5 seconds. Well, what's the
Mhm.
reason? Well, we just want security and comfort. We just don't want any harm done to us, so we fall for security and comfort, and that's the false prophet system. So as this evil gets worse and more gets exposed, and everybody realizes, oh my gosh, we need somebody to save us. And that's the false prophet system. And I'm more outspoken about that than anything if I get a chance, because what I see in the patriot movement is they're not acknowledging that. And the bright light test, Vem, is that there's a push to stand firm. And of course, we want to stand firm. I'll never wear a mask again. And, I'm not going to submit to the central bank digital currency. I mean, all those things, of course, you do that. But if we don't acknowledge how we got here to this point in our society by rejecting God. And that means if repentance is not part of the platform of the people promoting, we got to get our Constitution back. Of course, we got to get our Constitution back. That's obvious. But repentance has to be the path to get there. And if they're not promoting repentance, that means they're really representing the less evil false prophet system, which God says is coming.
I mean, they just legalized in all places in Ohio, pretty much abortion up to birth. I mean, how do
Correct.
you look at something? And you look at what's happening in Israel and the Palestinian territories right now. I mean, it seems as though the value of children. Before, it's like people didn't attack the children so openly, but now it seems like children are open play for anybody at this point. I mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty ludicrous.
Open season. I mean, and
Yeah.
again, that falls into, it's got to get more evil, and it already is there, by the way. I mean, it's just the evil gets exposed. So
Hmm.
then people are clamoring for security and comfort. And the angel of light, which is Satan,
Yeah.
reinvents himself. And that's what I see. I mean, I'm not a prophet, that's not my point. I mean, I'm just a dad. But I know it's very important that people see this as a spiritual battle, so then they don't get duped by a trick. It'll be a sleight of hand, just like September 11th was.
Yeah, totally. Scott, this has been an amazing interview. Thank you so much for coming on to the Blood Money podcast and the incredible work that you've been doing out there, putting up this fight. And I wish you the best of luck. We're praying for you here, and thank you for all that you're doing.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on. I would just like to say, if anybody is interested in following our case, I'd really appreciate if you would we have a separate website, gracechara.com,
Hmm.
SCHARA. And the purpose of that website, my daughter Jessica runs that. And we're accumulating names and emails because we're expecting, as this case proceeds, we'll have calls to action, and that allows us to communicate with people following directly. So that's all I'm asking for at this point. If you wouldn't mind doing that, anybody listening, I'd appreciate it very much.
Awesome. Is there any way they could help you financially with your case? Do you guys have a Give Send Go account?
We do have a Give Send Go, and that is linked in with graceshara.com. So if people are interested in helping financially, you can certainly do that. That's not the immediate goal. I mean, the immediate goal is we're trying to get a database, but I mean, of course, we're thankful for anybody who contributes.
Amazing. Groundbreaking case. Thank you so much, Scott. For the viewers out there, thank you for joining us for this Blood Money episode. Please make sure you check out AmericaHappens.com, where we have all of our episodes posted and all of our shows. I will see you on the next episode of Blood Money. Take care. Truth in media is not free. If the corrupt corporations run the media, then all we get is a pile of lies. So please support truth in the media by donating to AmericaHappens.com by simply going to AmericaHappens.com, clicking on the support tab, and entering a generous donation. Thank you so much.
Check out the America Happens Network, because Fox sucks now.